Uh, oh yes, gotta record. So like,
Right.
it was a challenge to figure out how to edit the film, whether it would be sort like you mentioned that it's sort of skipping through time or kind of, you know what I mean? Like it's non-linear in a sense. And like we basically kind of when we started to make the film, we didn't really know kind of like what form the film would really take, you know, especially given the three channels. We didn't know how the three channels would relate to each other. Um and like pretty early on in the edit, we basically I basically started to think that where we could keep it simple, we should keep it simple because the film could otherwise become very overwhelming and confusing very quickly, just because of the amount of things that are going on screen all the time. And so we decided to like that a sort of like simple, clean, straightforward approach to sort of letting them tell their story in a chronological sense, you know, from their early lives in Vietnam to like the war to fleeing the war, then being in the movie and then coming to America. And that had a very like kind of like cinematic, almost three act kind of structure to it. And so that was kind of the basis for how we built the narrative. And then from there, deciding how to relate the visuals to that narrative, like their audio of them telling that story in that chronology, it kind of became like a little bit of a free for all. And it was very like, it was like for me as an editor, it was really fun, but also kind of stressful because I basically ended up just like sort of like kind of in a free association kind of way, just sort of like painting with the footage and like kind of choosing clips based on what they were saying by instinct, kind of, because we had very little that we could use to literally illustrate what they were saying. It all ended up having to be kind of associative. And I think that you know, we're hoping, my hope is that it lends itself to a sort of poetic and non-literal kind of viewing experience, you know. So thank you for your comment.
Mm, thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Yeah.
I just really liked how the movie kind of like invited the audience in to like, I don't know, it felt very like private, like very much like I was just at home talking to my parents about the movie that we were watching, you know, I felt that really helped with like making the three screen thing not feel too overwhelming, and just kind of like a running conversation. That was really like that.
Cool, thank you. Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like your parents kind of like because that is a quite like I'm really happy to hear that. And it's a comment that we've gotten like a couple of times about the film is that it feels like we're in their home with them and that we're just sort of like um chatting with our family or we're part of that family or like you know whatever, like it has a familial kind of like feel to it, which you know I think I could just say like quickly and then I'll hand it over to Kathy that like part of the way we wanted to craft the film was to really sort of Kathy didn't want to be in the film. Like that was like one of the rules that we sort of set for ourselves. Like Kathy herself, even though it's about her parents and everything, she didn't physically want to be in the film. But that said, we decided very early on before we even went to start filming in Vietnam that Kathy's perspective would be sort of our perspective. Like we wanted to shoot the film and put it together and kind of have the film feel like it's coming from the point of view of a daughter, of their daughter, you know? And so the way we went about shooting the film and the way we went about sort of like kind of editing their voiceover was very much to capture what it feels like for Kathy as their daughter to hear these stories and to, you know, perceive her family history in that way. So, yeah, Kathy, why don't you speak?
Thank you. I'll just say that one thing, there's nothing that makes me happier than to hear that somebody felt like it was very poetic, because I agree. I haven't watched this version in a while, and I was struck when watching it how utterly beautiful and artistic, and how Chris really, when he was drawing on his intuition. I mean, editing a film is extremely strenuous, like physically strenuous. There's a lot of attention and there's a lot of just sitting at a desk and clicking, and there's so much so many decisions you have to make. And so you have to be both very organized and very logical, and also have room for, like Chris said, painting. So it really moves me to watch the film. And so our method in putting it together was, we put together a radio edit, and that was something that Chris said. It's like, why don't we put together the story, and that drives the film, and the rest sort of follows. And so I'm newer to film, and one of our, I was watching poem films, as sort of, in my mind, some of the films that I like, which they're associative, so it has that element. But there were a couple other films that we watched that we really felt like we wanted to hew toward, or at least curve around. And one of them was a beautiful film called Will You Look at Me, by our cinematographer's colleague Shu Lee. And that also, the filmmaker is hardly in the film. There's moments of their voice doing a narration. And I knew specifically, I didn't, I do that often for my own poetry. I write in English, I write, I write poems, but I didn't really want to have my voice narrating and directing the audience. But there is a kind of way where I wanted my parents' voices to be the ones that direct and lead everybody. And I love the ways that they talk together to form the story. This one, so our short version, we actually ended up cleaning up their dialogue quite a bit, and cleaning out these like stutters that they have. So it's a different experience, in part because we needed it to be very concise, but this one leaves space for all of those stutters, or all of those like coughs, or all of those things that happen. And there's something very humane about that, leaving those parts in, that I really enjoyed watching this also. So yeah, I mean, my goal, my dream has always been for people to get access the way that I get access to my parents' stories, which is like to invite them in to the kitchen table, or to the garden, or to the living room, or like to my mom's sewing machine when she's talking. And so being able to replicate that experience for viewers is very, very tender and very dear to me. And I got in the chat, somebody said, this is inspiring me to, you know, capture my parents' narratives as refugees as well. And I think this gives that sensation of, a daughter listening into a parent telling that story, and really like paying dear attention to it. And so that's really beautiful that other people want to do that as well, because, it is 50 years since the end of the war. So it's 50 years since my parents got on a boat and left. My parents won't be around forever. And so there's a way that this documentary really provides for me and others an archive, an archive of many things. The other thing I wanted to mention was just, I don't know the form or the term very well, but now that I watch it, I'm like, oh, it's an essay film. It's a film that sort of meanders like and moves according to like somebody's thoughts, like to essays to try, right? And so there's a kind of like movement of walking around a little bit in it.
Thank you. There comments, questions?
We
Kat?
have,
Huh?
do we have ones in the chat?
No, just someone thanking them for what Cathy actually sort of commented on. Cathy, what did you learn about your parents through making this documentary that you might not have known before?
I will say I've learned, I knew this story my whole life. So in terms of learning, a lot of the learning came a little bit from Chris actually being part of the collaboration process, because he had curiosities of his own. Because my parents, when they tell the story and I'm listening, like they've sort of told me almost every piece of the story that I've heard it 1,000 times, and I've asked questions and they've like answered. So the entry of people like Chris, and we also had a sound recordist who's Vietnamese, being in the space, and this sound recordist is specifically interested, like was doing a master's thesis on the extras of Vietnam War films. So had a lot of research and and is a filmmaker, so curiosity about film. So when my dad says things like, I don't like violent films, like that was new to me, or my mom saying like, I only like happy films, that's new. The other thing that I knew, like there's no reason for them to say I don't feel exploited unless I'm asking that more directly, and because there's an outside audience that already presumes that they're exploited. So that was the moment when I asked directly, did you feel exploited? And the answer was no. And so the new piece of information particularly felt like it's less like the cocoon of our family and more introduced by sort of curiosities from, that sort of second circle of viewer who is curious, who might be curious about this story, curious about film in general. So I think like what I learned new came from that. And also just the iterative process of storytelling is that sometimes my parents will say, even though they're mostly very consistent, um, there's one piece of the story where in this film, my mom said that, okay, the Red Cross asked us and they asked our permission and we said yes. Everybody wanted to go. In the next film, when I went back and asked the question again, my mom said, no, 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 we actually were forced to go. We had no choice, but we wanted to go anyway, which is a hugely, like, I'd heard this story for 40 years or something. And for to suddenly hear that, that they were forced, that was new. I didn't know that. And that only came about because, I asked again and my mom corrected the record and corrected her memory, or corrected her prior retelling.
There questions?
Nita, there's a question in the chat from Helen.
Oh, in the chat. Oh, thank you. In the chat, Helen said, thank you. I really enjoyed that. I did enjoy how poetic it was and how your parents seemed relaxed. For both, I was wondering if you considered using more historical footage, or maybe there was some beyond Apocalypse Now and I didn't pick up on it.
Chris, you want to try first?
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you. So yeah, I think, it's funny. I don't remember if we ever even really considered using historical footage of the war. I think or like newsreel footage of the Vietnam War or anything like that. It was never really part of kind of our conception of the film. Part of I think making this film was kind of an interesting exploration of like, again, it's like a semi-experimental 3-channel poetic essay film. You really can make up the rules as you go. You can make any kind of decision creatively that you want. It's not a commercial blockbuster that you're going to go see that has to follow a very specific form. We could kind of invent the form. But in doing that, like, it's almost like the options are like somewhat overwhelming in a way. Like you have like kind of like the whole, like any possibility for how you want to make a film, at your fingertips. And like, I think a friend of mine who's a experimental filmmaker, I asked him, I was like, at the outset of doing this, I was like, how do you sort of like approach making a film when you can do like anything, like when there are no rules? Like how do you make a rigorous, interesting, kind of thoughtful piece of work where everything feels intentional? And he basically was like, make up rules for yourself and then stick to them. He's like, like give yourself boundaries, give yourself sort of like a structure to work in. And so like I was very conscientious of like kind of I didn't want the film to just feel like a random kind of like free for all of like multiple formats and stuff, because we knew we were going to be shooting on Super 8 film. We knew we were going to be shooting on a digital camera. We knew we were going to use Apocalypse Now, and we knew that we were also going to utilize Cathy's family's home video archive, which is VHS and 8mm film. And in a way, we wanted to use those sources as our sole kind of like mine for the film, you know, our bank of like footage. Like, so because in a weird way, those are the what we captured, what Cathy's family has captured over the years, and Apocalypse Now are all kind of speak to like a personal family record of the story that we're trying to tell. And to introduce another element from outside, um, just didn't necessarily, it didn't like pique our interest to do so. And so in a weird way, we wanted to sort of tell a very, I think it maybe it's in sort of establishing a really specific point of view that we're trying to convey, is that everything that we show and everything that we see is directly culled from that family point of view and that family history. It's and Apocalypse Now is in that because they were in Apocalypse Now. So like in essence, it now functions as another one of their home movies. You know what I mean? The film in a weird way kind of collapses the two. You know, it kind of um, as well as collapsing our new footage that we shot for the film when we went to Vietnam. Kind of like it all kind of becomes like kind of like part of the family archive in that way. And so that's sort of like the source, the single source that we wanted to use in a broader sense, you know. So yeah, it didn't really, it wasn't really ever anything that we considered.
Yeah, I want to say that is a great question because that's such a possibility within documentary film. And, you know, documentary film, sometimes you'll have somebody who's specifically in charge of finding archival footage, indexing archival footage, getting permission for archival footage, like historical footage. I was deeply disinterested in bringing in historical film, especially in my mind, uh, the visuals that I have grown up with around the Vietnam War um, are oftentimes it's just like death and people clamoring to escape. It's extremely dehumanizing and it's very desperate looking. It's very um, atrocity oriented. It's very much like what people have done to Vietnamese people and Vietnamese people's need to react to what was done to them. And so it doesn't strike me generally, and who is taking that footage in general, it's US newsreels, it's like the AP, very few would be from a Vietnamese perspective, and that centers like I don't want to use the word humanity, but something that is much more intimate and full and fully realized, so I think that my interest is less about sort of situating my parents within history and more situating history within my parents, like if that and in the same way where um you know the Apocalypse Now version that we use that you see it's grainy for a reason. It is literally we could have used the Blu-ray, we could have used a cleaner um version of Apocalypse Now, because there's many, because Coppola is obsessed with this film and part of it is because he owns it and that's like a rare thing, right? But we chose to use the VHS tape they've recorded from television and it lines up like it's in their drawer. Well, it's in my drawer now, but it's in their drawer alongside like our birthdays, like here's Apocalypse Now, here's our birthdays, here's like my baptism, like these are what we have as our collection of home videos. And so it becomes this very much feels like a place where yeah, I want to I love thinking about the intersection of the personal and the political, and where certainly we are not outside of history, but also history is rooted inside of people. And so I wanted to tell a person story, I guess. Yeah, and this one does it less, but I do think of, all of it as being this amazing epic story. And something about it's about like living a life, survivorhood, like storytelling, being funny with one another. um, and I want that to be kind of like the story. So the writer Le Thi Diem Thuy is like, I want to bring whole Vietnamese bodies into the room, and that's sort of much more of my interest. I don't really, even in the places where my parents are being erased, at least their voices are actually intervening into that sort of erasure. And so that's where I don't really want to show like, where like people are clamoring on boats as to like, oh, we're trying to leave on a boat. Instead, I'd rather have it be where it's more accurate to my life, where I'm traveling through Vietnam in 2022 and to the Philippines in 2022 and trying to find traces of my parents. So that was more resonant in terms of how to pair footage than to go back to 1975 and show that, but it's not really my family anyway, so I think that was part of our thinking.
Thank you. It's really comprehensive. I do like the idea of challenging, like, the scripted narrative or what the mainstream version of stories and
Mhm.
how they're interbeing, similar to sort of
Mhm.
Jessica Hagedorn's Dog Eaters, where there's the media narrative or the newspaper narrative versus like the gossip of the chismes, or Rhea Tajiri's,
Yes.
memory and history, right, as well, in terms of like when your mother mentioned like, oh, I have this memory of it this way, but maybe not so much. Like I'm like that as I get older, like my memory changes too. And I think parental memories sort of change. Um, and how do you sort of like interweave that into the story to know that memory sort of kind of, what you were talking about, Cathy, about you asked your mom or your parents one way, and then or your mother, and then the story sort of kind of narrative sort of changes with sort of rethinking through the process of that storytelling. And how do you sort of think of it if you ask them like later on, would the narrative be similar, or would it change a little bit? And how does also your story also add to the collection of like sort of like these Asian American narratives, that you see is sort of important to the growing canon? That's a
I
lot of
love,
questions, I'm sorry.
but I love your mention of gossip and chismes. Like, I feel like my parents both grew up in a village, and so I feel very much that gossip is communal storytelling. It is a way to relay information it's very community oriented, and it is like what you hear, and that to me is anymore, I'm more interested in that than like sort of history book or research only. I feel like that is as true as a testimony, even if it's faulty, because what we get is a story that is being told lifetime with others. And you have palimpsest, so you have the way that memory works, being sort of given, and the fallibility of gossip feels also like more accurate in some ways than the sort of so-called objectivity or infallibility of a history text or a history book or historical archival data and knowledge in that way. So I think that's like very, very I love that you bring up that point. And in terms of Asian American narrative, I feel like my parents' narrative has only, like people like my parents have only more recently been told, that is the generation of Vietnamese people telling their story. It's still starting. It's still building, and it's still nascent. And so I'm grateful that my parents were able to tell their story in this form, because oftentimes, like with my generation, where like in my poetry I got to write it in English, and so it's nice to be able to have them tell their story without too much of my mediation. Although I translate it, it's still them saying what they want to say, which is they were not exploited, and that is entirely different from my perspective, which is this feels like exploitation, this feels like capitalist exploitation, this feels like somebody who has much more power than you using your body, using your bodies to do something. So to allow for that type of narrative to have space is really important to me within Asian American literature. It's not sort of like, my parents, like, as they said in the film, like my dad dropped out of third grade. My mom wasn't able to go beyond sixth grade. So it's important that it's not just like hyper educated, through an American education system, people get to like tell their story. I think that is really important to me. And, you know, there's more to say, especially around the Vietnam War and its importance within, even the term Asian American, being born of that. I just can't stop thinking about Palestine these days, and thinking about, the relationship between empire and art making, and the ways that art making can be like Viet Thanh Nguyen just wrote his like a piece about sort of literature of empire versus like anti-imperial literature. And I feel that this to me is a kind of anti-imperial literature. That's how I feel about it. I want to sort of continue to push in that direction. So I'll pause there and throw it to Chris, because I've been chatting quite a bit.
I don't know. I don't have much to add. I think that's great. What you just said.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned that you were kind of changing the format from a three screens to one screen, and I was just wondering, like, what decisions do you have to make to like cut it down, or like press the amount of feeling and emotion that was in the original three screens?
Yeah, thank you. It was really, really challenging actually to sort of shrink it down basically from 3 channels to 1 channel, from 30 minutes or close to 30 minutes to 15 minutes. It ended up being a very long process to figure out how to do that, like just from an editing standpoint. Um, uh, I sort of at the outset, so we made this one first. We made this in we filmed it in 2022. I edited it over the course of late 2022 into 2023, and then it was finished at the end of 2023. Uh, it was in the gallery until early 2024, and then after that, I started like kind of like all throughout like basically the year of last year, I was like trying to figure out how to make it into a single channel shorter version. And for a little while, I was like playing around with like trying to change it completely, like making it very, very chronologically different, and just sort of like, because I felt like the story was too big to really cut in half or cut the length by half. Um, and like I realized that sort of the initial instincts behind how we ended up sort of structuring this piece still kind of spoke to the best way that we felt to like tell the story. Like to depart from the kind of like straightforward chronology felt like kind of like weirdly wrong, you know what I mean? And so like I ended up like after many months of trial and error, I ended up basically kind of returning back to the original and sort of basically starting over from scratch and kind of using it as a guide structurally to sort of figure out like, okay, it's like I still want to keep the chronology. I want to start here and start in Vietnam, end in America basically, and have Apocalypse Now in the middle, in the Philippines in the middle. And it just sort of became like, what are the pieces that we need to tell that story? And I then started to just pull from the installation, from the 3 channel version, and kind of start to cobble it together, in in a way step by step, and kind of like it's funny to watch this version now because we've just been so immersed in the shorter version over the past several months since it premiered at Sundance, and has been playing festivals and stuff. It's kind of it's like it's interesting to me. I'm like, oh yeah, like we had a whole different use for like certain pieces of footage and certain quotes from Kathy's parents, and they're now sort of repackaged and re kind of iterated in this version in a way that it's still the same film. In my head, they're exactly the same film, but and they tell the same story, but practically speaking, they are like quite different in that way. So to answer your question, like at the end of the day, like we ended up wanting to basically preserve what we made in this longer version and kind of just figure out a way to make it a little bit more concise. And so like I don't know, there's like it's also a little bit more focused just on the Apocalypse Now chapter. Um so there's a little bit less about their early lives in Vietnam and a little bit less about what happened, like some of their lives in America. It's still part of it, but it's just a smaller share of the overall runtime. And that just sort of, these are all sort of decisions that we made just kind of like for like as the edit was ongoing. It's kind of like you kind of as an editor, you have to sort of go by your instinct in terms of like trying to feel through the pacing and the rhythm of a film. It's kind of musical in a sense. You get sort of like an intuition about what is drawing people's interest. How long do you want to live in a certain moment? You know what I mean? When do you need to move on? And so I just sort of had to follow a different instinct like I was like kind of like become accustomed to following those instincts, but knowing that it had to be much more concise in the shorter version. And so, yeah, it was a long process. I don't know. Kathy, like, yeah, what would you add to that?
Well, I think like with my parents' lives, which, in that first version, it's longer, their lives in Vietnam. What we decided was like, if the Apocalypse Now piece is going to be the center, how much context do we need for everything to make sense afterwards? So it was much more like of this, like let's choose one line that would sort of tell the story of like tell some version of the story of these like 5 minutes. Like we'll just like tell 1 minute of that or something like that. And so um yeah, I think that it was a lot like editing poetry sometimes. Like I'll write more and then I'll distill into what's the line that you're gonna keep. So I think that it was surprising how many transferable skills I had into filmmaking for my first film. I was like, oh, this is like editing a poem, in some ways. This is and also Chris is, in addition to being an editor and a director, he's an amazing writer. He's a screenwriter. So we also collaborated on different ways that the dialogue, where I'm translating it and it makes some sense, but in English it's a little odd. And so he's able to make, even making the subtitles very condensed in that way was really interesting to watch. Yeah, so yeah, it's like editing poetry in a way, and it's in a way nothing like editing poetry because not only do we have to edit out the radio edit down, but Chris had to choose how to do it from 3 channels to a single channel. And I love watching it in 3 channels again because it feels so full, there you get to like the way time moves. It's beautiful to watch like my mom next to like my nieces and nephews, and so it feels like this whole span of time simultaneously moving. There's so much movement, and to move from that into that one channel, like which is Chris is more like accustomed to that, but it is a decision. And so with the 3 channel, we were able to, let's imagine it's 30 minutes, but it's almost like an hour and a half of footage, not quite, but like that of visuals that you have. And then now we're like cutting it all the way down to 15 minutes of the whatever it is, the choicest morsel or whatever it is. Yeah.
I also think the big difference, actually, now that you say that, is like the the installation, knowing that it was going to be presented mostly in a gallery setting, something that Cathy and I talked about when the edit started was that like and this was new to me, like with 3 channels and knowing that it's going to be in a gallery. And how often do you, I don't know if you guys are like think about this that much, but like when you go to an art gallery and you're looking at video art, how long do you actually spend watching it? You might like just watch a few minutes and then move on to the next piece. And so when we were editing this version, the longer version, one like kind of guide post I gave for myself was that I wanted it to be edited in kind of, even though it was going to be around 30 minutes long, I almost edited it in really small pieces, like every 3 minutes or every statement or every like little moment was its own kind of like little nugget, whether it's like 30 seconds up to like 3 or 4 minutes, like it's like its own little like statement. And people could drop in, watch 1 or 2 of those things, get something that feels complete, and then keep moving in the gallery. Whereas the single channel version is much more narrative and propulsive in a sense, where people are literally sitting and watching it from beginning to end, and it has to have a kind of narrative unfolding, where the concision just becomes much more important at that point. It's less about the individual pieces and more about the whole thing kind of cohering together in a more propulsive way. And so that was kind of like the biggest sort of like mental switch in going from the longer version to the shorter version.
There's a question in the chat. What advice do you have for young Asian Americans who want to tell their family narratives, and what's next in your creative journey? So I'll say that interviewing my family, for some members, it's very easy. And for some members, it's terrifying because I don't know what they'll say. I also don't have a good relationship with my dad. You can't tell, thankfully, in this film, but um, my advice would be just to try to ask, like get brave and just make the time to sit down and sit with your family and ask. And for some people, their parents won't talk, or their family just won't talk about things because it's really painful to them, or they want to hide these stories. But I think those sorts of evasions are very interesting as well. So just recording just get brave and ask, in a sweet way, just like, hey, can I record you? I want to know about you. I want to know about your life. And then sit down, make a list of questions and ask, and just see what happens. It is scary because people don't, it's not your normal mode. I don't know what normal family mode is, but it's not this all the time. I mean, it's more normal for my family, but it's not normal for every family. And it also can feel sort of, formal, or maybe even like there's conundrums around extraction. Am I, taking my family story in order to do something with? So, um, but I'm contending with that. Like at the end of the day, it's still part of my legacy. It's part of my story. And if I don't ask it, like, where is the story going to go? And maybe it's going to disappear, and I won't have it, and other people won't get to like learn from learn from your family. So yeah, get brave. And then what's next is I have a poetry book coming out April 29th. It's called Becoming Ghost. It's about this story, but it's also more about the challenge of asking family about the story when, they're not talking to you. Like, you've been disowned. I've been disowned. Or, talking to family who no longer is alive, or talking to family who doesn't speak the same language that you do. So, the idea of drawing out those stories through different various mechanisms, and owning it, and owning those voices, and having that chorus be part of the larger story. So that's my next step, and I'm trying to write prose about it, but that's TBD, because with this film and with the poetry book, I feel like full full up in many ways. It's a very joyful thing to, like, we're West Coast premiering next month, and this month and next month, so it's just traveling. So that's where we're at. Thank you, Janine. Chris, I want to hear about you. What advice do you have for young Asian Americans who want to tell their family narratives?
Um,
It's for you.
yeah, because I haven't done that. I haven't told my family narrative, and I get how it's like scary. Actually, like what you're saying, Kathy, like one thing that it brings to mind is, you know, like I don't know if this is like literally true, but there are no we talked about this early on. There are no existing video recorded interviews of people, Vietnamese people that were extras in Apocalypse Now, in existence until we made this movie, right? Like that is something that like it makes me think like when it comes to the question of like um young Asian American creatives that want to tell their family narratives, if you don't do it, who will? You know what I mean? Like, uh, and your family, I'm sure, whoever you are, if you're like, if you're an Asian American person, your family's story is worth telling if you want to tell it, you know? And if you don't do it, who will, you know, it will be gone when you're gone and when your family's gone. So that's a little bit of like a motivational like kind of thing. Like if we didn't do this, then the story would be lost. It wouldn't be there for posterity. So think about that. And that might help sort of get you over the hump of like actually sitting down with your parents and like talking to them about these things. And the other thing that I would say is like kind of just from like a filmmaking standpoint is that and this was very apparent when we made this film with Kathy's parents. Like Kathy's father, like Kathy said, like they don't have a great relationship. They weren't actually speaking before we made the film. And her father's very like cantankerous and kind of grumpy, you know. Um, but as soon as we brought the camera out and sat him down in front of the camera, it just like poured out of him. His story, like he was really, really ready to have his story be known. You know what I mean? And so I think it's like don't underestimate actually how much people actually do want to tell their stories, like even if they haven't had the chance or even if it feels like kind of like uncomfortable, like actually people, most people feel like they have a story that's worth telling and they would love to share it if they have the opportunity. And so you know, it's just all about the tact in order to sort of like you have to be very respectful, you have to be very kind of like go into this interaction like maybe it's partially that I was an outsider and that I'm male or whatever like that like got Kathy's dad to like open up to me. But like I think it's also that we approached them in this story knowing like that it had like a tremendous amount of value and that it was this really precious, amazing, epic story. And so there was a level of respect and deference that we gave to it in our approach. And I think like when you have that level of respect and deference for the person that you're interviewing, they will be more kind of forthcoming, potentially more willing to be forthcoming. So that's just like something. And also like actually like from a filmmaking standpoint, having the camera, or even if you're not a filmmaker, if you're a writer and you're just like tape recording, having this thing, this barrier, this technology between you and the subject, like actually can be very helpful in a way. Like it might seem intimidating or it might seem like it makes it an impersonal thing, but actually having the barrier there kind of alleviates some of the potential interpersonal tension because it's like you're there to do a job, you have this piece of equipment, it's going to be on, like it's all of a sudden it's a little bit different than just sort of like sitting around and arguing around the dinner table. It's now a thing because this equipment is there and it's like a professional thing, or it's like it's almost kind of like it's a school assignment or whatever. It's we have to do, there's like more of like a thing where you have to do it. So like I would say like sometimes those things can also help in this process. You know what I mean? It helps embolden you as the asker, the interviewer, you know, the person that's doing the sort of interrogating, and then it helps them to sort of be like, oh no, I actually have to answer this because the thing's recording me, so I can't just like be a jerk about it or whatever. Maybe they can be, but those types of things are helpful. Um, and I guess as far as like what's next, yeah, the film is continuing its festival run. Kathy and I were just in Switzerland for its international premiere. That was really cool. It's going to continue to play a bunch of festivals all over the world for the rest of the year. Kathy and I are starting to work a little bit on like a feature length version of her parents' story, which may take the form of a narrative scripted film as opposed to a documentary. And that's like a process that we're just sort of at the very beginning of. And I'm also, you know, writing my own fiction features that films that I'm hoping to make in the near future as well. So
Wait,
yeah.
what about your documentary?
And I do have a documentary idea. Thanks for reminding me, Cathy, that I want to do that is about my family who live in Western Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh, and they live like very close to where that train derailment in Ohio happened, where all those chemicals were released into the air. And so I kind of have this idea for a potential installation piece or documentary film that kind of is about my nephews who are in high school right now, kind of sort of living their lives and sort of becoming adults in the shadow of this like environmental catastrophe that's like kind of unfolding all around them because I don't know, I think of my hometown. I don't know if you guys know the term sacrifice zone, but it's kind of like it's like the term for like parts of the country that are just heavily polluted by industry and like kind of with very little regard for the health and well-being of the people that live there. And so I think my family lives in what I would consider kind of a full regional sacrifice zone. And that is a project that I am like tentatively sort of approaching doing sometime in the future.
Thank you so much again. Round of applause for. And one last question before you go, because I was just curious, how was Sundance? Like I like read about it, but I don't really know. Like what was that experience like? I think for those of you who may wanna, I don't know, you have to be invited, right? So yeah, I'll never go. But what was it like?
Yeah, it's a Sundance is I actually would love Cathy to answer because it was her first time ever at Sundance as not kind of a newcomer to the film world. For me, I've been to Sundance. I've been lucky enough to have work at Sundance like several times. This was my third time there, and every time it is like kind of a really amazing, miraculous like platform to have for your work. I'm very blessed in the sense like we are very blessed in the sense that we got to showcase our work there. And it was, I will say, like our premiere screening at Sundance this year was maybe like the greatest film screening I've ever had. Like it was just like really, really, the crowd loved the film. It was snowing. It was in the Egyptian theater, which is like the iconic like Sundance venue. And just like the sort of excitement for the film was really palpable, and people really it got like a tremendous response, and people were very, very I just couldn't have asked for like a better response for the film, you know, didn't expect it. And the fact that we then ended up winning an award at Sundance, it made the whole thing like really, really kind of like a surreal kind of experience. But yeah, Cathy, what about for you?
It was amazing. It was my first film festival, and it's very busy. Like we had a spreadsheet with all the possible places where you can go, and there's so many, especially early on, there's all of these parties and there's all this industry, there's all of this stuff. And for me, my goal was just to have fun. So that's what I did. And toward the end of the week, all the industry people leave. And in fact, everybody else leaves because it's just repeat screening. So we got to show our film 4 times, like officially on the schedule. But then after we won the award, we got like a bonus 2 screenings. And so I was there because I wanted to stay till the end. I'd never experienced it before, and I work remotely. I teach poetry, but I teach virtually. So, I teach at the MFA program at Antioch University, but, I mentor one-on-one. So I was able to do my job while also being at Sundance. And so in those final screenings, I was the only person at the Q&A, and I loved it. I don't know.
Well, because we were in a program with like 5 or 6 other short films, and we were every film, all the filmmakers were there for the first half of the festival, but then Cathy was the only one left. I left halfway through, because I had to get back to New York for work, but Cathy stayed for the whole festival. So for those final screenings, they would show like, the full program of short films, but Cathy was the only one there to speak about the work.
Yeah, it's a full program of award-winning short films, and so I was the only one chatting, like talking to and it would be like a full. I loved it. It was amazing. But it is, like for some people it is very industry or it's very busy. It's so busy that people get sick. It's in the snow. So but honestly, like couldn't ask for a better launch or experience. It's like a dream come true.
Well, congratulations, congratulations. Hopefully we'll bring you back again when your other work is out there as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Very special.
Thank you all so much. Y'all are amazing. Happy birthday and, blessings to everybody.
Thank you, thank you.
Have a great evening. Yeah, happy spring. Happy
Yes,
tax day.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Right.